Queen Victoria's riflebird. The painter, William T. Cooper. Oh, you gorgeous thing. The studio, Australia's tropical rainforest in northern Queensland. Come on, come on.
Do you want him to fly in?
Come on. Come on, you beauty. Come on, boy. Come on, come on, gorgeous. Come on. Oh, look at that colour.
Here he comes.
Come on.
You're a pretty boy.
You're lovely. Pictures of birds hang in millions of homes. But prints like these were not originally intended to be hung on walls. They were illustrations for scientific publications. Most were produced during the 19th century, but some of the loveliest were drawn within the last few years by one of the greatest artists ever to work in this most exacting discipline, Bill Cooper. The riflebird, which he's sketching today, is an Australian member of that dazzling family, the birds of paradise.
When I'm sketching from life, I don't aim to do a finished drawing with all the detail. What I'm looking for is the posture of the bird, what it's doing, how it generally appears to you. The general shape of the bird, that's what I'm aiming for. The most difficult part drawing a live bird is, of course, the fact that it's jumping all over the place. So I'm looking for just the essential shapes to start. I've noticed that the first sketch, you don't capture the bird. By the time I've drawn the bird a dozen times in a dozen postures, I'm starting to know the bird. Just try and get the expression, the position of the eye on the face and all those things that make the bird look like it does.
Not many of his subjects are as obliging as this riflebird, which comes into his garden from the surrounding forest. Although Bill now lives in a really wild tract of rainforest, he was born outside Newcastle in New South Wales. But as long back as he can remember, he was fascinated by birds. These most beautiful tree ferns, were they in your countryside?
No, not where I lived out in dry country, and so rainforest always had this great attraction for me, mostly because of the birds I could see there that I couldn't see in the woodland.
How old were you when you made your first bird drawing?
I should imagine about 8 years old when I first started scribbling down birds, yes.
And did you have formal training?
Oh, no, I had no formal training.
At all?
None at all.
But then the jump from just making those kind of, amateur, I suppose, to the professional business of doing scientific illustration, that must have been a huge leap. How did that happen?
Well, I just happened to have painted some birds, and the curator of birds at the Australian Museum saw these and asked me in for a talk, and things just developed from there.
Any good?
Yeah, I'll take it home and use it, eh? Off we go.
What, for painting?
Yes, to make a nice background.
It seems to me that actually you prefer your leaves to be eaten by insects and half chewed and decayed. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right, yes. I like to get the backgrounds as authentic as possible, and in nature you always see the leaves chewed and eaten by things.
Well, I've never seen a Bill Cooper painting without a chewed leaf in it, I'll tell you that. Can you go wrong? I mean, can you get the wrong plant on the wrong tree?
Well, that's always a problem. I try very hard to make sure that I've got the right leaf.
That's a particularly beautiful lichen, isn't it? You seem to be fond of it. Is that a study of the same thing?
This would be, yes, the same species, I should imagine. You can see the same red fruiting bodies on here as is on there.
Yeah. Well, look, you've got lots and lots of sketches of the riflebird. How many would you need before you tackle a painting?
I get as many of these field sketches as I can. Gradually, you get to pick up all the parts that make the bird look like the bird.
And why do you really need the sketches when you've got a specimen like that?
The sketches show me the bird in life, and as you can see, this is just a very stiff, not very lifelike at all.
Well, you can say that, but then why would you want a dead-like thing?
My sketches don't pick up all the final detail. They don't show me exactly how the edge of the bill here is, and these I use for colour and count the feathers.
You actually count the feathers?
Yes, because different groups of birds have different numbers of feathers, and if I'm opening in this wing here, I've got to make sure I've got 10 primaries and 9 secondaries or whatever it is on this particular bird, and so on.
So that is really accurate, even to the degree of the number of feathers?
Well, it has to be, yes.
If you were looking at that, would you be able to guess how that would display?
Just from the skin, no.
As a test, supposing you were back in the 19th century, sitting in Europe, and that landed on your desk, what would you say? Would you say, oh, well, it's been distorted? I mean, look at these curious wire things out of the back end.
I would think so, yes. I would say this has been packed in a box and all the feathers have been bent up the wrong way or something. You would have a problem interpreting that, and you would be more likely to imagine that these feathers would fan out, on which they don't in the display.
You could forgive those chaps in the 18th and 19th century who perhaps didn't get it quite right.
Yes.
And this magnificent plate of one of these many-wired birds of paradise was drawn by an artist who indeed had never seen the living bird and only had one of those prepared museum specimens to work on. So perhaps it's not surprising that it's unlike any bird that ever existed. It was published in 1806, and the artist was a Frenchman, Jacques Barrabon. Much of this superb book is devoted to birds of paradise. Here's another one, perhaps the most famous kind, the plumed bird with plumes sprouting from beneath the wing. This one is shown at rest and is reasonably accurate. But here is the very first illustration of a riflebird, and that, I'm afraid, is very wrong indeed. Part of the trouble is that Barrabon had no idea how to arrange the display plumes. The European fascination with exotic creatures, of which Barrabon's book had been a part, led in 1829 to the founding of London Zoo, where you could see some of these exciting animals alive. When they died, their skins were prepared for display by John Gould. One year, a collection of bird skins arrived in the zoo from the Himalayas, and Gould persuaded his wife, a talented artist, to make drawings of what the living birds must have looked like. He then published them as a spectacular successor to Barrabon's book. Great areas of the world were then still unknown as far as their natural history was concerned, among them Australia. Gould decided that that was a continent whose birds could provide him with marvellous subjects, and off he went with his wife to look for them. He certainly saw the male riflebird and its drabber mate. But did he ever see its wonderful display? If he did, he never drew it. Display was not his primary interest. This was a bird that had never been scientifically described. By custom, the first person to do so had the privilege of naming it. That was the prize, and to claim it, you needed a specimen. Gould named the species in honour of Queen Victoria, and sent the skin back to an artist in London who had to imagine what it must have looked like when the bird was alive. The finished drawing was to be reproduced by the recently invented process of lithography. First, a draftsman copied it onto a block of fine-grained limestone using a wax pencil. The ink to be used contains a lot of oil. The stone is wetted and then the ink rolled over it. Since the ink is oily, it sticks to the wax lines but not to the wet stone. The stone is fanned to dry off the water. A blank sheet of paper is laid carefully on the inked design. A thick layer of padding, and into the press it goes. The black and white print was then coloured by hand, with, once again, the original drawing as guide. The colours had to be built up in several stages, one at a time. Often the work was done by whole teams of women, each painter having her own part of the design as her speciality. The rifle bird was just one of 681 plates in Gould's mammoth 6-volume set of The Birds of Australia. He followed that with other huge works, including The Birds of New Guinea, in which some of his most famous plates appeared, including the first drawings of several species of that spectacular family on which today Bill Cooper is such an expert, the birds of paradise. I asked Bill if birds of paradise had always been a particular passion of his.
Ever since I was a child, yeah.
Truly?
Oh, yes. I loved them, and of course their environment always fascinated me, so I can always remember being crazy about birds of paradise and jungle and New Guinea. It was a great fascination.
How did you see them? How did you discover them? How did you know about them?
Well, I can remember, I must have been about 8 when I first got a little book, a Batsford colour book of birds or something, and it had Gould's, that beautiful plate of Gould's Lesser Bird of Paradise, first plate.
Me too.
That's in me why.
Yeah, really true. Really true.
Great.
So it was this plate of John Gould's that gave Bill his earliest ambition to look for birds of paradise and to draw them. New Guinea, the headquarters of the family, is an immense forest-covered island lying in the tropics to the north of Australia. Large parts of it, even today, are pretty wild. 20 years ago, they were even wilder. During the 1970s, Bill went there 4 times and spent a total of 6 months in the field. Many species only live in very restricted areas, and Bill had to get to extremely remote parts if he was to see some of the birds in which he was particularly interested.
I'll never forget the first bird of paradise I ever saw was the Ragiana, and we walked up this old winding track up a ridge, and the most beautiful male Ragiana flew straight across the track in front of me at about eye level, and that to me was just magic. I think I finished up seeing about 40-something species, including bowerbirds, which was quite a lot of species of birds of paradise.
Indeed it was. there are only 62 species in the whole family. They are immensely varied. This one, a Parotia, clears a dancing arena on the ground in which to display. Others, like the Ragiana, dance up in the trees.
I can remember a particular occasion. I could see 3 male birds displaying within the field of vision at the one time. It was just beautiful. The normal display where it throws up its wings and calls and the red plumes are thrown up and it leans forward. I can remember one type of display which I had no knowledge of at that time. I'd be testing my memory a bit to keep it accurate, but this display was suddenly different. It turned and faced the female, who was uphill of the male, and the male started shuffling towards her and he puffed out all his chest feathers, which I often wondered what that was for, but he fluffed them out and formed a great pom-pom through which his beak was protruding. It was a great display. I remember being in camp and seeing a ribbon-tailed bird of paradise feeding on a little fruit way up in the forest. And I said to my local New Guinea man, could you climb that to get those fruits? And he said, no trouble. And away he went right up this tree till it terrified me. He got me the fruits and I was able to draw them. Just about everything I collected eventually finished up in the Birds of Paradise and Bowerbird book.
When Bill's illustrations were published in 1977, they established him as one of the greatest of all bird artists. The standard edition of the book had the plates reduced to 2/3 of their actual size, but there was a monumental edition of just a few copies in which they were shown full size, and this is one of those. Here, for example, is Bill's illustration of the Ragiana bird of paradise. This is the Superb. The Magnificent. The Parotia. The 12-wired, that strange one with the bent-back quills in its tail. The ribbon tail. And here, Bill's first published drawing of Queen Victoria's riflebird. That volume, with a text written by Bill's scientific collaborator, the taxonomist Joseph Forshaw, was followed by an even bigger work, The Parrots of the World, all 340 species of them. Now the two are working on the kingfishers and related birds. Those include hornbills, and while hornbills may not rival birds of paradise in gaudy brilliance, they certainly do so in terms of personality. What exactly are you measuring, Will?
I'm just checking whether the relative distance between this one to this one is the same here. In the paintings, I've reduced these by 1/3 to fit them on this size board. And I've got to make sure that all the relative distances are as they are on the bird, because these are the points that give the bird the expression.
Perhaps I shouldn't ask this, but if you go to all that trouble, wouldn't it be easier to take a photograph?
Certainly not for me, it wouldn't.
But you have to get, presumably, particular positions as well as your artistic composition, do you not?
I am required to show all these diagnostic features. If they had a specific colour on the rump, I have to put one where the wings are open to show that sort of thing.
Is that a major restriction in the artistic composition of the thing?
It does restrict to a great degree, yes. The fact that the book is vertical, then all compositions have to be vertical. I have to have a male and a female, or possibly an immature in every picture. I'm trying to bring the background in the environment and still try to make it look artistic as well as be accurate.
And presumably individual. So it's
Yes.
not like any other one. How many species have you illustrated?
I really don't know. It's quite a few. Well, it must be around, without count, I imagine it's probably 500 odd species.
How many species of hornbill?
Well, there's 40... It depends who the taxonomist is, but...
All right, how many have you illustrated?
I think we're illustrating 42 species, I think. I haven't actually counted them on.
So this is number...
This is number 41.
Well, let's see how it goes. Different species of hornbill are found in Africa, India and Southeast Asia, and Bill travelled widely studying them. It's doubtful if anyone, even today, has seen all 40-odd species alive, but Bill has certainly seen more than anyone in Gould's time could have done. And the science of ornithology still needs such meticulously accurate and detailed drawings, particularly now when it's no longer acceptable to shoot specimens by the dozen in order to store their skins for reference in 1,000 museums. Watercolours today can be reproduced without having to be copied by a draftsman or coloured by hand. They're scanned by a laser to produce 4 separate printing plates, one for each colour. The first printing is in black, and this is overprinted with red. Then comes the blue. The fourth and final colour combines with the others to reproduce the complex and subtle shades that are in Bill's originals. All these prints show the birds in repose, as scientific convention demands. But Bill's latest portraits are different. This is the sickle-billed bird of paradise. Here the birds are not only half hidden by vegetation or in dappled light, but at their most dramatic, in display. The bluebird, and this has a most improbable way of displaying. For these large pictures, Bill uses acrylic paints, and these give him fresh scope for his astonishing skill in representing the texture of these amazing feather adornments. And now it's the turn of Queen Victoria's riflebird to have his portrait painted in one of his most spectacular poses. Bill has been putting out food for him for several weeks, and now, at the beginning of the breeding season, the male comes out of the forest to display to any females around and to pose for Bill. These big compositions start on a blackboard with some rough sketches.
In this case, I've got a bird in display and set out on the end of a long limb with mountains behind. Do what I like with it. Composition, that's freedom too, yes. That's a freedom I really enjoy.
The composition determined, the painting itself starts with the background. Those detailed studies of vegetation can now be exploited to the full.
I can bring the light from behind them, as I'm trying to do in this case.
Why wouldn't you bring light from behind them on a strictly scientific thing?
For taxonomic work, you've got to show the design properly lit from the front. Whereas this, once I backlight it, well, then the colours won't really be true to the bird on the front of it.
And what would happen if you did that in a scientific drawing?
Well, my collaborator would complain for a start and say the birds weren't the correct colour, but it wouldn't really work in a taxonomic work, no.
A sheet of transparent plastic allows him to try out different placings for the displaying bird. Acrylic as a medium has its problems. It changes colour very slightly as it dries, so if the bird's posture needed to be adjusted, it would be very difficult to match the previous colours. It has to be right first time. And now for the final version. Bill lavishes particular care on painting the plumage in order to capture both the extraordinary metallic iridescence and the velvety softness of other patches of feathers that are characteristic of birds of paradise. After the misunderstandings and approximations of earlier artists like Baraban and Gould, the rifle bird at last gets its definitive portrait. For some austere scientists, maybe, these pictures of birds in action may lack the disciplined rigour of objectivity. For some picture lovers, their style may not be free enough. But for those who love both birds and painting, they have a vivid, monumental quality that captures both the spirit and the appearance of the bird and makes them unforgettable.